Pels fans, and welcome back to the Holy Hardwood podcast with Tony and Pat. Tonight, we're going to take a deep dive and look at our last game against the Denver Nuggets. We're going to go ahead and shortly review our statistics from the game, as well as segueing into some broader topics regarding overall construction of the roster and the current fit of that said group. Tony, do you want to go ahead and start everybody off with some of our stats from that Nuggets game?
Yeah, thanks, Pat, for that. So the Pels ended up losing 134 to 116, but Jordan Hawkins had 31 points on 10 of 19 from the field and 7 of 14 from three, while also bringing in 7 rebounds and 3 assists. Brandon Ingram had 22 points, 2 rebounds, 5 assists on 10 of 22 from the field. Zion Williamson had 20 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists. Matt Ryan off the bench had 17 points, 4 of 6 from three, and Dyson Daniels also contributed 9 points on 4 of 5 from the field.
Yeah, great. Thanks for going ahead and relaying those stats. As we typically like to say here on the Holy Hardwood, we think the stats certainly play a large role in determining what we're actually seeing there in the production this team is, putting out on the floor. But we certainly don't only rely on stats. We like to use our, knowledge of the game and our expertise, and tell the fans what we really are seeing on a nightly basis. So, in regards to what we actually saw out there, while still using those stats to, help lead us in the right direction. Obviously it was a tough night. Um, you know, Kind of what we're seeing here is similar, right? It's that tale of two halves. Quarter to quarter. Things are changing and things are changing quickly. I, I I struggle to at this point fully grasp, exactly what is causing the discrepancy. Right? We've hammered home a lot of the talking points that we have felt in terms of um, you know roster rotations, defensive scheme, and we've talked about a lot of things, but a game like that when you're playing a team like Denver, the defending world champions, albeit they are down, Jamal Murray, but that's a loaded team over there, right? They have arguably the best player on the planet currently, and everything kind of drives through him. So albeit, yes, Jamal Murray is a really good player. He brings another dimension to them. Um, but that group is loaded, man. And this is not a group that is not accustomed to playing with Jamal or without Jamal Murray. So you don't see the typical drop off that you might see from night to night when you look at other teams that are kind of, you know, going into play games without their number two guy in the lineup. This is a group in Denver that played, essentially an entire season without him, and played at a very high level. If memory, is correct, I believe, Tony, that the year that Murray was out with that ACL injury, I believe they, if not made it to the semifinals in the West, I actually believe they made it to the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just going off those points that you're kind of saying, this is, not uncharted area for the Nuggets here. They've had a lot of time, not only with Jamal Murray being out, but Michael Porter's been in and out of the lineup, and Aaron Gordon as well, just with little injuries here or there. So, Jokic kind of knows how to get this team running, depending on who is out there on the floor. And you kind of saw that it took them a little while in that first half to get going, but once they got there in the second half, they turned everything around, like you saw.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one thing to keep in mind is, right, there were some things that were certainly telling, and some things that were maybe borderline concerning, and I think those are some of the bigger picture things that we'll go ahead and get into here in a little bit. But you still got to keep in mind, right? It is one game. It is early in the season. If anything, against Denver tells us that one game truly doesn't matter. Is over the last year or two, we've really handled the Nuggets and really have played them really well, and if not, have owned the series with them. We're neck and neck, and we see how that turned out, right? They're the defending NBA champions, and we were scraping by to you know get in the playoffs via the play-in, back to back years. So by us losing to Denver, do I certainly believe that now that, the sky is falling and that's the case? No. I mean, it's one game. Certain teams on a given night are going to match up with teams in different ways, but certainly a situation where I feel like we can take a lot from it, and it certainly opens the doors to a whole lot of other conversations, big picture about this team.
Yeah, just from my perspective, kind of just hitting on some of the things that you said there. Um, you know, it's not like we don't match up well against these guys. It's not a lack of talent from our perspective or from our end. I just think that Denver, from their run last year and getting that championship, they truly just know how to, wither through some storms and, how to attack teams once they've kind of given that first punch. I mean, they're champions for a reason. So, I mean, I don't ever think it's a lack of talent with this group. Like you said, we've kind of gone neck and neck with them the last couple of years. I like our matchups with some of our guys against their guys. I just think, you know, last night we kind of just came out flat in that third quarter, and that might be just like a difference between the Nuggets being a championship team and seeing things and being there and doing that, and just the Pels not being ready so far this season. In those second halves, it seems like they really start off really good and are running and are, like I said, defending and rebounding in that first half. It seems like it's just that when it trickles over to the second half, we lose that momentum and we lose our defense there, so which then bleeds into our offense and we don't get out and running. But I think we did a really good job in that first half of doing all those things. It's just how we can kind of correct that moving forward in these next couple games and weeks.
Correct. Yeah, and thanks for calling that out. And like I said, this game did have a little bit of a different feel to it, right? I think some of that had to do with the fact that, you know, the Pels organization was kind of coming off the news of CJ being down with that injury, and there was a lot of conversation outside of the team and in the media and things like that, you know although the Pelicans organization was disappointed and certainly somewhat deflated over the injury to CJ. I saw the idea tossed around, online in some different areas that, the front office saw this as an opportunity to truly gauge, Brandon and Zion as a duo, see the feasibility in terms of, can these guys be two cornerstones of this franchise, not in terms of, their own play and ability, but as a group, right? So I think there certainly was a different feel coming into this game. I would be shocked if not some of that was at least, reverberated internally and they were aware of it. And, and obviously I don't want to get too far offline of this Nuggets game. Um, but certainly something I'd like to go ahead and take a deeper dive into. Um, is some of the things that are kind of going around, right? Some of the things that are being discussed in terms of who's at fault for these Pelican struggles. What is causing the things that we're seeing on the court to occur? Why are we having such highs and lows in terms of discrepancy between certain groups and other groups? So obviously, I want to open the floor up to certainly discuss anything that you would like to hammer home more specifically about the Nuggets matchup. But once we're finished with that, I would love to go ahead and segue into that and spend a large majority of the time, speaking to the fan base on those topics.
Yeah, no doubt. I kind of want to speak on the lens of kind of going back to last year in a sense, where you saw this Pelicans team had a real struggle of, coming out of the gate during games. And that was the big question last year. Why can't the Pelicans seem to get on the page to start games? Is it Willie's fault for not getting these guys up? At the end of the day, these guys are professionals. And it seems like this year, like I've said, they've done a pretty good job of, getting off that bus and starting games really, really good. And that's when the offense looks good as well, is when they're all upbeat, they're getting stops, they're running, they're gunning, like you saw last night, hitting those like transition threes. When this team doesn't have to think about necessarily what they have to do offensively, like I said in a previous podcast, they're very hard to match up against with, the Brandons, the Zion, CJ, who's out now, but now you're seeing the evolution and, certain guys stepping up like a Jordan Hawkins and Matt Ryan and different players of that sort. So I don't necessarily know what's going on, after once they go into halftime and why they're coming out so flat, but you've seen the numbers on this where in first quarters, they're doing good. They've outscored opponents by 6 points. In the second quarter, it seems to be a really hot quarter where we've outscored our opponents in 7 games by 54 points. But in your third and fourth quarters, you're getting outscored 65 out of the break and then 30 in the fourth in those 7 games. So I don't know what needs to change there, but I've really liked how they've at least, flipped the script from last year and seem to be coming into these games really sharp and, really hitting teams hard. It's just how are they going to be able to put these things together for a full game?
Yeah, understood. And that certainly is that's a line of thinking that a lot of the fans are having, on a nightly basis is trying to work their way through this. Um, it's very hard to look at these games and to think about these games and to not allow yourself to be reactionary, right? Everybody, that's the great part about sports and being a fan is, everybody truly is invested in, you know, this team and this organization and more importantly these players. But I think it's important to, although be a fan and all, be invested, you've got to remove yourself. You know, I, anybody else in the media, anybody else talking about it, people on TV, nobody knows what's going on inside that organization, right? Nobody can gauge the level of comfortable, how comfortable these guys are on a night to night basis. And, nobody takes, a big picture look in terms of, what direction is this team headed in and what course has this team taken in the past that has currently got them to this place? And that's something that, as we work through this year, and obviously, right, and we could all kind of see it coming that there are certainly some, other platforms or, individuals that are talking about the same topic on a nightly basis that, aren't, in my opinion, taking that same level of thought and truly stepping back from it and trying to, gauge the situation and provide insight on it from a non-emotional point, right? I mean, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not, I have not been a Pelicans fan for life. It's not like I'm from New Orleans. I don't have any of these same, deep rooted things that I understand the fans that have been, Pelicans fans for 20 years, right? If have gone through the ups and downs, they're starving for a competent contending team. But I also think that when you are so hungry for it and you are so connected from it, it's very difficult to look at these things with a level of rationale. You know, I and I think that that's something that I hope here on the Holy Hardwood that obviously us coming from a different perspective, being fans of the team now for 5 or 6 years and really only can look at it for ideally what it's worth under this regime, right? And this somewhat group of guys. We don't compare it to past regimes and past guys, AD's group, Chris Paul's group. We don't do that. We're simply comparing it off of what we're seeing on the floor, what we're seeing night to night, and you know, doing our best job to relay that into feedback, for those listeners and those people that have the same level or the same interest in the Pelicans that we do. But I think we're already 7 games in. We're starting to kind of get some of that. I don't want to call it clickbaity feedback, right? But I don't think there's a lot of things out there right now that are accurately depicting what we're seeing on a night to night basis. And I didn't know if that's something maybe you have an opinion on, or if that's an area where you just want to kind of tip it up and just kind of let me go ahead and speak on some of the things that I'm seeing and provide my insight and my opinion on it, whether others believe that that's correct or incorrect. That's something that I feel like is my responsibility as co-host on this show is to essentially provide our listeners with that difference of opinion.
Yeah, most definitely, Pat. I'll let you kind of tip it up from there, from your perspective on all those things, and I kind of just want to point something out or just hit on something just before you go in on all that. I kind of agree with kind of what you've been saying or outlining, and we are 7 games in, and there are things starting to circulate and be set out there, which really, like you're saying, it's 7 games in. It was just one game against the Nuggets. Yes, there's some glaring things that we've talked about here on this podcast and everything like that. But I think, sometimes we just need to take a deep breath and see it how it is. And, you know, certain things will usually iron itself out, like Brandon and Zion, just for example, their offensive woes to start the year. They're two great players. You go back to the law of averages, more than likely those two are going to perform at a all-star level or even better as the season goes on, as they get more games under their belt and keep continuing on this season. But my main biggest thing from that is just to, you know for us to be successful, everybody's got to be bought in on that other end, and I think that's truly where uh, these wins are going to be starting to stack up, is to try to focus more on that defensive end, which, like we said, will bleed into our offense, which ultimately I think then more listeners or fans of the team will see those guys on the offensive end start to take off. But until that happens, you're still going to be seeing some games where, Zion might struggle or BI might struggle or other people involved with the team might struggle. So that's kind of my 2 cents about it. And from here, I'll just let you kind of go in on what you want to talk about, and if you need to throw it over to me for my perspective as well, I'll be here.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and I appreciate the opportunity to go ahead and sit down and talk about this a little bit more in depth. And I agree with a lot of the things that you're saying, and a lot of those things capture the some of the conversations and the places that I'm going to take this, with the rest of this pod. But like you said, it's 7 games in. We are 7 games in to a completely different playing style. Playing with a group of guys with skill sets that have not been here for 3 years, 4 years. 7 games into a new offensive identity, a complete change of pace. We are also playing with a guy that we did not have for the entire season. Um, there are a ton of variables that cannot be discounted or discredited when you're looking at a 7 game sample size. I mean, we are not even 10% into the season, and I am already hearing from other well-established platforms and groups of individuals that have a big following. Other members of this fan base entrust that group to provide them with a high level of detail and breakdown on their favorite team and or players. I don't take that lightly. I understand that it's a responsibility of ours to provide that feedback as objectively as possible. And that's something that I personally do not believe is occurring. I think there are a lot of preconceived agendas that certainly some people would like to be the case and are certainly going to try to spin anything in that direction to fit those narratives. But, being in a position like they are and what we're striving to be, that's just not the correct way to do it, right? You've got to set that stuff aside. And with that being said, it would be wrong of me not to set this conversation up with saying, I am a big BI fan. It's public knowledge. I am a fan of his game. I'm a fan of the way he moves, the way that he thinks. I'm a fan of his perspective on the game. I always have been, regardless of how the rest of his career shakes out. I will always be a fan of his. But at the same time, I will be as objectively and as hard on him as anybody else because I do have high expectations on him, just as does this fan base, does this organization, does himself, most importantly. Um, Now, do I think Brandon has played great basketball this year? No, I don't. I think he has looked not not disengaged, but I think he's struggling to adapt within 7 games to a completely different play style with a completely different cast of individuals and players around him that he has not had, which is a good thing. That's great that he has more perimeter help. How many games or how many screenshots did we take where Brandon was driving to the rim and he had 3 guys looking at him and nobody giving a damn who was on the perimeter as a threat that he was playing next to? It's a blessing that this is the situation, but you can't expect things to change overnight. That's just an unrealistic way to do it, and that's honestly that's why a lot of you individuals are not in the position to be making decisions at the NBA level. If you feel that 7 games in, because this is what you saw against the defending champions on a given night, that should decide how the team should be built and the direction they should go in, then you're already stating that you are not equipped to do that job. You know, and and I'll say the same about Zion. I want Zion to succeed. I want Zion to be the player that he has the ability to be. I truly believe Zion Williamson, in the right shape, in the right condition, if healthy, if locked in, has the skill set to be an MVP caliber player. You know, probably not even 10 guys in the world probably are legitimate MVP candidates in terms of talent and ability. He is one of them. Now, it's his job to maximize that and put himself in a position to utilize that to the best of his abilities. Nobody can do that. He is a grown man. He has probably close to $200 million written to his name coming into his bank account. He's a set man. Financial incentive or fame or anything like that is not going to motivate him. His own personal drive and dedication and motivation to be the best player that he possibly can be and be one of the best players on the planet are going to be one of the things that drive him to ultimately accomplish that goal or to fall short. I don't believe that those two have played very well, this year as a group. I I also don't have the expectation that you'll sit there and say, well, this group has been together for 5 years. These guys have been together for 5 years. Well, yes. Have they been in the same city for 5 years? Well, no, not even that. Zion was gone to Portland. Um, so even that leg you kind of fall short on. Have they had the same coaching staff for 5 years? Well, no, they haven't. They've gone through 3 different coaches who all played 3 different styles. Have they had the same supporting cast for all 5 years? Well, no, they didn't. They initially started off with a backcourt of Drew Holiday and Lonzo Ball and JJ Redick and a center and Derek Favors, and then that didn't work. And then they went the route of Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams, and again, they went in the direction of a philosophy that never made any sense for his skill set or BI's. And then they segued to Willie Green, who brought in a defensive mentality, and ultimately seems like a really good fit in terms of um, being a player's coach and really doing a good job of keeping the locker room together. But has certainly he's a first time coach who's also going through growing pains. At the same time as those growing pains, Zion and Brandon have both been out. So, yes, have they been together on the same franchise for 5 years? Yes. They've played a very, very, very small number of games together with a variety of different casts and playing styles that neither one of them have been able to settle into. And yet, we're supposed to believe that 7 games in, again, brand new playing style, we're going to space it out, much more shooters. You guys aren't going to play the same style that we have forced you into, right? When looking at Brandon last year and the year before, who had no space, who had to carry the offense by himself. 7 games in, you're supposed to understand how to play like a well oiled machine and play like the 2016 to 2023 Golden State Warriors. Our expectation is we're going to shoot 43s a night, and that's how we're going to beat people. Well, newsflash. Not even the Golden State Warriors of 2016, 17, 18, 19 were good enough to roll the ball out there and shoot 43s and only play that style to win a title. They couldn't do that. Were they a great defensive team? Sure. Were they a really good shooting team with impeccable firepower to blow teams out of games because of that? Sure. But they also played inside the arc. They went and got one of the best mid range scorers in the league in Kevin Durant because they knew that closing out games, they couldn't go down there and only jack up threes night after night after night. They had to play within the 3-point line and the restricted area. That is where playoff games and championships are won. You don't believe that? Well, let's look back at the last 5 NBA champions, right? Sure, did the Nuggets shoot a lot of threes? They did. Was Jokic really good on the interior? Yes, he was. But I know for a fact Jamal Murray posted up a lot of smaller guards on the block and played on the elbow extended. I know Nikola Jokic, again, one of one, greatest player on the planet, caught the ball at the free throw line, played around the mid post, extended free throw line, and played in the mid range. So they did it. Let's look back beyond them, right? Let's look at some other teams, even Golden State. The precedent that everybody wants to look at and emulate and play like, although nobody else has Stephen Curry. They didn't start winning those games and look like the title favorite until Andrew Wiggins started playing at an incredible level as a 6'7", 6'8" wing. Now, was he making some perimeter shots? Sure he was, but he wasn't shooting 8 to 10 threes a night on high volume and also shooting 40%. He was attacking the rim. He was playing in the mid-range. He was playing in the post. That's how he was playing, right? Let's look at another team, Milwaukee, the year before. And everybody gives Giannis all the pub and Drew Holiday and all of that. But I think most people would say that the reason that they got over the top is how well Chris Middleton started playing. Chris Middleton is a guy that can hit outside shots. He's a guy that can get to the rim, but he also lived in the mid-range. He was a guy that lived in that 17 to 18 foot range, playing against smaller guys, hitting contested mid-range shots, because when the game slows down, that's what you have to do. You know, I'm not saying a team should live solely shooting 17 footers, but to set the idea and the precedent out there that there's no place for anything to be played in the mid-range, and that the only way to play is to drive downhill with 5 guys looking at you and to kick it out and spray for 50 to 63s a night is the only way to win in 2023 and to win a title and to build a roster is honestly, it's irresponsible. It's just not factually true. If you don't believe that, let's keep going. Toronto, right? Who did they trade for? They traded for a 6'7" wing. Again, has the ability to shoot threes, has the ability to get to the rim, but he's also a guy that lives in the mid-range. He lives in the extended post. He posts up smaller guys when he has a mismatch. So I think it's incredibly inaccurate and, again, irresponsible to start peddling 7 games in that this team is a failure when Brandon Ingram is on the floor, although I haven't been a fan of his completely this year, and I think he isn't in a good rhythm, and I think he is struggling to find his way within the system. But to solely pin it on him and to say that the reason they can't win or will never win is because he wants to take mid-range shots and has no desire to take a perimeter shot is just not true. I'm sure Brandon wants to shoot from the perimeter. Why would he not want to, shoot open jump shots? He's not shooting it very well, and I know for a fact, as my, past experience as a player, if I'm not shooting on the floor at a certain part of the game or a certain part of the season at a very high clip, I'm not going to keep running back there to keep shooting those shots. I'm going to go back to something that I know that I am confident in to help me get back into a better groove, and that's what we're seeing. We are seeing him struggle offensively, which is not something that he typically does. He is typically, for a 6'8", 6'9" wing, one of the more efficient guys at generating offense as a scorer. That's what he does. He's one of the best scorers at that level. But he is looking back to something that he is comfortable with to get himself going. And although it's not ideal and he's not playing great, we cannot 7 games in start talking about the fact that he's a bum or he can't play or the reason that they're not winning X, Y, and Z and they're coming out flat in the third is because of that. You know, I just I can't get behind that and I never will. You know, again, don't think he's playing great. I don't think Zion is playing great right now. They are also missing a lot of key guys that this group looks a lot differently if they are there. So, on that front, I just I, I wouldn't be doing my job here if I didn't keep it honest and keep it a buck and, essentially at least voice my displeasure with hearing that, especially from a group that I feel like has um, a responsibility to, go ahead and paint an accurate picture.
Couldn't agree more, Pat. Kind of with all that being said, and just hitting on the Bi point and like Zion point is what I was kind of trying to say is, with these guys that you have for your franchise cornerstones, uh, to be a fan for the Pelicans, obviously you're going to ride and die with these guys. Yeah, we can all agree that they haven't been playing well, and from my perspective, I'm always going to believe in what I've seen in previous or past iterations from these guys. At Zion's best, he's a guy who can average 27 or 28 a game, shoot 65% from the field, and nobody can stop this guy.
And that's totally fair, right? And that is what we should be doing because we can only base it
Mhm.
off what we have seen in the past. But at the same time, like I said, I love Zion and I wish him nothing but the best success. But the only thing I'm hearing about Zion on a nightly basis is talking about his, you know, desire and the his will to play, and he's not playing with any energy, and he's not defending, he's not rebounding, which are true, which is hurting the team. But all I keep hearing about is, oh, well, the only thing this team should do is put the ball in his hand at the top of the key, which again, they should utilize. But to paint a picture that this team's problems would all go away if they just played through Zion and spread the floor, that they'd have no problems. Let's keep it honest. Zion has not looked like Zion's self 7 games through, and we have at least a legitimate reason to understand or expect that he wouldn't be the same player. It is far more likely that this is the new version of Zion after numerous lower extremity injuries when his game was based on explosion and athleticism and ability to get to the rim and play above people. But yet we're suddenly just saying, yeah, we're just gonna look past that. And it's a more believable thing to say, well, Brandon Ingram just decided to not want to play with his teammates. And I think actually an actual quote that I saw was he doesn't want to share the ball. He only wants to pound the ball and play by himself. Well, I just, that's not true. He has never shown us the desire to do that. Has he been forced to do it, due to who he's playing with? Sure. But those same people were the same people telling him to play that way, right? I don't think that Brandon Ingram just suddenly forgot how to shoot threes. I don't think that he suddenly forgot how to be an efficient scorer. I don't think he forgot how to rebound. And yes, rebounding is a hustle thing. And I will be the first to say Brandon Ingram needs to rebound at a higher rate for this team to be successful. But I also do know by being a past player that when you aren't playing very well offensively and you aren't in a good rhythm, it is going to bleed into those other areas. So while I do agree that both of these guys are struggling for different reasons, if you're going to say that, you need to keep the same energy for both guys. You can't also sell me on it's Zion's team, Zion's team, Zion's team, but then he's not going to carry as much of the burden. I think neither one of them have emerged as rightfully saying, this is my team. I think both of them would like to, but until that's the case, both of them are going to get the same level of, you know, criticism from myself. Neither one of them are playing good right now. I think that's a very fair assessment. Zion Williamson is shooting almost 20% less from the field as he had the rest of his career, coming off numerous lower extremity injuries, and nobody's talking about it. And he lives around the rim. He has the easiest level of shot on the floor from a percentage perspective. Anybody who lives 6 to 8 feet away from the rim is going to be expected to shoot at a higher clip, which he has done at a historic rate. But nobody's talking about the fact that that's down 20% and that's not concerning moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that everyone has to be honest about. I mean, this team's going to run as those guys run, and you can't just pick apart one guy over another when in all reality at the end of the day when I look at it it says, hey, Brandon, Zion, you need to be better. And I don't necessarily care about the offensive end because in my belief I know those guys will step up and rise up and get to where they need to be. It's all that other stuff like you said. When Brandon Ingram has 6 rebounds or more, the percentage of them winning ball games is significantly higher. And I'm sure the stats will back up Zion Williamson as well. But like last night, Brandon didn't show up on that end and rebound. Zion, yeah, he ended with 10 or 9 or whatever the case may be. But like you said, he's missing a little more around the rim. So probably 4 or 5 of those were those offensive rebounds where he's sticking back his second chance. But until they can fully accept that challenge on the defensive end, I don't necessarily see this team going too far.
And there
And that's
should and
just
there shouldn't yeah, and there shouldn't be an expectation that they are. But I'm of the belief if it's not going to work, get rid of both of them. But don't spin it. Like 7 games in, we can make a realistic assessment of what exactly whose fault it is and be as strongly as it is when it's just as easy to say and rightfully say and be honest about it. They are not neither one of them are playing well. 4-3, regardless if that's above your expectation or below your expectation or meets it, they are 4-3 because of those two. That is the reason why their record is 4-3, right? They've won some games because of them. They've lost some games because of them. They've lost some other games because they've rested and were injured. But everything revolves around those guys. They are the sun. Everything else revolves around it. And another thing that I saw and heard yesterday, I heard it as well as saw it, was the concept of, you know, that game was lost in the first quarter because of the way that Brandon came out and dictated the game and how he was playing, as well as the game was lost due to the fact that when Brandon has the ball, he over dribbles and everybody else decides that they don't care and they check out. Well, do I want Brandon to dribble the ball all the time and over dribble it and to get into rhythm? No, and I'll be the first one to tell him that. Sometimes he needs to get off the ball faster. He needs to do a better job of that. But if I have to sit there and worry about if my role players, whose job is to, play around my two set stars, mentally check out because they haven't gotten a touch or are disengaged because either one of those two aren't getting it to them enough, well, that's not a problem with my two stars. That's a problem with my role players who need to accept their role and understand that they are not the sun. They revolve around those two. And what those two decide to do offensively dictates what those role players' nights look like. So don't give me this, oh, well, by not getting them involved and not doing that, they check out and then they just, they get thrown the ball and they just said, screw it, we don't want to shoot. You've been made. Well, come on. We're professionals here. This is the NBA, you know, National Basketball Association. You are a professional. Every one of those guys are paid to do their job and to play their role. They are paid to be a role player. They are not paid $150 million over 4 or 5 years to be a star and to take on star responsibility. That's the reason why we're sitting here talking about these two. That is their responsibility, which they have come up short so far, which is okay to say. But just to say things like that are just it's mind-boggling, right? That's not the reason why they lost that game. Is because the role players decided to remove themselves from the game because those guys were, especially Brandon, were removing them from the game but with his playing style. And he didn't play great. I will tell you that. But that's a fallacy. That's just not true.
Yeah, Pat. I mean, like we said, we can talk about this for on and on and on, and every which way that you want to spin it. But I think there just needs to be some honesty that goes around about this team and how people perceive them and see them. Because, like we said, we're going to try to keep it honest to the best of our abilities, and we're going to be hard on these guys because these guys are the stars of the team. They are the franchises, and they should be the leaders. Something that I heard from Zion is like, I'm still trying to learn how to be a leader after being asked a question after the game. It's like, I get it. You're still younger. You're 23, but when are these guys just going to take it?
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
when is Brandon and Zion going to be like, hey, we've been talking about this for so-called 5 years now, or been together for 5 years. Yeah, we haven't played the best, but let's go show this league what we can do. And it starts with us every single game. No ands, ifs, or buts. Those guys have to show up from the beginning of the open tip till the end of the game. And if the other guys on the team see them not bringing it, what do you think that their body language or what they're going to do? It's a whole effect that bleeds down to the whole team from top to bottom.
Yeah. And obviously that's entirely different in terms of that is not schematic. That is not anything that anybody else can do, right? And I said it earlier. I'm not saying this and painting a picture that, oh, well, these guys cannot be, discredited, and you cannot, give them an honest feedback of their performances. No, these are the guys and they have to be the guys. I am just as fine if we find out for sure that after this season they are not the guys, then blow it up. Move them both, go in a new direction. That's fine. But to take such a short sighted view at this is just, it's just, you just cannot operate and make decisions based off of that. I have harped numerous times. This is not as cookie cutter as you think it is. Yes, Zion he is a freak. He is an amazing talent. The things that he can do, no other guy on the planet can do. But to sit there and spin it like it's easy to build a team around him and it's easy to put guys around him that are going to be successful is not true. He is a 6'5" power forward who cannot shoot outside of 3 feet and will not shoot outside of 3 feet, who will not defend and who will not rebound. That is not easy to cover up, and that is not easy to build a team around. I've seen the sentiment numerous times. Well, it's both their faults, and it's impossible to win with them because neither one of them will shoot, and neither one of them will defend. Well, sure, that is a hurdle, but part of that hurdle is I shouldn't have a 5-man who is immobile, cannot protect the rim, wants to pound the ball with his back to the basket, even though he's not very good at it, and we want to paint him like he's a 3-point shooter to space the floor. That's not what he is. That's just not what his role is, and nobody defends him like that. He can stand out there and hit as many threes as he wants, but nobody's still going to guard him. So you have failed to put the right 5-man next to him. They have failed for 5 years. I love Herb Jones as a defender. And yes, is there a best case scenario besides them, whether it's Herb or Trey? No, you're going to have to make a sacrifice. But that's part of it. I'm not going to make my decision based around Herb Jones. My decision is going to be based around my two best players and most talented players and what they need next to them. If I have to put Herb on the bench and I have to play Trey because Trey is a otherworldly shooter and one of the best shooters in the league, then that's what I will have. That's what I will do. That is just part of the process. But to paint some picture that it's like, oh well, it's not Herb's fault. He shouldn't be asked to do that because those guys can't shoot and everything is their fault. Well, I understand what you're saying, but if it's not his responsibility, don't put him in a position to play next to those guys all the time. And they've done a good job of doing that with Zion, and that's why a lot of why his plus minus numbers and those runs have occurred while he's on the floor. Yes, he draws attention and he kicks to shooters, but he's also playing with more shooters. He is playing with more space. He's not playing with Kyra, who can't shoot. He's not playing as much with Dyson, who cannot shoot. He's playing with the best shooting group that we have on the floor. Rightfully so. But you can't discredit that. Like, you can't just look past that because it doesn't fit your narrative. You know, this team is completely different, and we're 7 dang games into this, folks. 7 games. It's just like you said. At the end of the day, the only thing that this team can do is embrace it, embrace those two. Those two have got to accept it, lean into it, accept the responsibility and the challenge in front of them. And then the coaches, the front office, and those other guys need to do their job to be the best version of themselves that they can to support those two. It's a team game. Yes, it is, 100%. But stars drive this league. Nobody has won a title solely based on their role players. Everything comes down to your stars. And if you're not putting them in a position to be as successful as they can be, despite their deficiencies, then you're not doing your job. I don't need to hear that Brandon and Zion can't shoot. That's irrelevant. You knew Zion couldn't shoot 5 years when you took him. 5 years ago when you took him. You know, Brandon has shown that he's a capable shooter when he's in rhythm. He's shot almost 40%. Again, not at a crazy high volume. But he is a very talented and very, very, very good offensive player that gives you a skill set, if utilized properly, that you can benefit from and you can use to your advantage. It's just, there's just a lot of things out there that I just think are truly, just at this point, just really, really, really unfair and ultimately doesn't solve the problem. It's just, you're just putting duct tape over the hole rather than doing the right job of patching it up, right? You're just hoping that it holds for some time, because I can assure you, if you only thought it was Brandon's fault and you move Brandon and you think that that's the issue, it's not going to fix your other problems. Getting rid of Brandon isn't going to make you a better rebounding team instantly as a team. It's not going to make you more active defensively and make you more mobile. It's not going to do that. So, what? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of like I've said, we've said it for countless minutes here on tonight's podcast. It's 7 games in. Like, yes, we know the deficiencies that this team has, but you gotta let it breathe a little bit and trust that your guys are going to be coming around. I mean, that's why you do pay them all this money, right? You believe in those two guys. Yeah, CJ's out, but that's besides the point at this point. These guys are good enough to take this team and lead this team, and that's just the responsibility that they have. And that's the biggest thing. It's the responsibility. And I will just keep saying it. As long as those guys can just come in and take care of their business and show up every night, this team will come around. It's been 7 games.
Yeah.
Let's look at this, again when we're 25 games in, and then see what's happening at that point.
Yeah, and rightfully so. If 25 games in, they're playing the exact same way, then it's you don't need to bat it around. You don't need to play ping pong with it. It's going to be obvious. If they can't do it, they can't do it. But you got to give them an opportunity to do it and give them what they need to accomplish it. I mean, how many years have we seen LeBron James be the very, very best player in the world, undisputably, arguably the best player in the world? But how many segments have we turned on the TV and say, well, LeBron doesn't have enough help? LeBron doesn't have enough shooting. Even the greatest player in the world cannot reach his ultimate, maximum ceiling if he doesn't have what is needed around him. And not only do we not have everything that we need around those two guys, the things that we have just added are so new that it's not a surprise to me. I'm sure BI is struggling immensely with the fact that it's like, okay, well, this is entirely different. I actually have guys that can hit perimeter shots, but at some point, I expect him to revert to old bad habits, because that's what everybody does as players, as humans. When things get uncomfortable, which he's facing because he's out of rhythm and he's not playing well. He knows it. He's going to revert to habits. He's going to do what he did in the past. So I'm not surprised by it. Despite it not being the best approach, I'm not going to hammer him for it. He knows he needs to be better. I know he needs to be better. That's as cut and dry as it's going to be, you know?
And the team knows that. Don't you think all those guys in that locker room, I'm sure probably after what was it, the Hawks game and then after this Nuggets game, like they can look at themselves in the mirror and say, "Hey, I wasn't good enough tonight."
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're dealing with all of that, like you said, internally, because those guys do hold themselves to a higher standard. And all this newness, like you're saying, with newer players, a new offensive coordinator with Borrego bringing in a whole new system that they've never played before, trying to get everybody in rhythm as well as themselves. Like we're saying, Zion hadn't played since January. You know, it's gonna take him a little bit. I've seen that be thrown out there a lot. Like it's he hasn't played since January. He hasn't played since January. Like, okay, if that's the
Yeah.
case,
And nobody's
then
played
let
with him
this
since
breathe.
January. It's not just him, it's everybody else. You
Yeah,
can't,
I
you
mean,
can't, I mean, you can't look back. And like you said, everybody in that locker room knows it. And if there is anything I am sure about, I am pretty confident that nobody is looking at Brandon with a side eye in terms of teammates. They know how committed he is. They know how badly he wants to win, and they know how he views them as teammates. You know, to even, and I'll even give you a shout out on here. Good boy Chetta Chaz. For you to say something as irrational as Brandon Ingram is a cancer in the locker room, I mean, shame on you, Doug. I mean, come on. If there's anybody that's not a cancer in the locker room, it's that guy. That guy's almost been kicked out of more games and has been suspended for fighting opposing teams, for fouling his guys hard or running their mouths to his teammates more than anybody in the league. That guy is beloved in that locker room. Larry Nance is not turning a blind eye to BI. Trey Murphy is not turning an eye to him. Herb Jones, nobody is doing that. If you're even going to have a conversation that's solely based on your opinion and rooted in what you think you've seen and what you think you've heard and has nothing to do with the actual play on the floor, you can't paint a picture that Brandon is a cancer. Now, you might be able to say that Zion's a cancer because he's actually expressed and has shown you that at times he hasn't wanted to be around. He's expressed unhappiness with being there, although you can dispute if it's been reported or not. That might be true. I'm not saying it's true, but at least that's feasible. That's somewhat something you can support. But to say that, oh, Brandon's the reason we're losing, and he's a cancer in the locker room, and everybody has quit playing with him, instead of just saying this team isn't playing very well and not having to reinvent the wheel and have to come up with something on the spot because you want clicks and you want views, just just be honest about it. They're not playing well. The group is not playing well. You have guys playing good here and there, and that's when they have good quarters. But they're not fulfilling their responsibilities on a possession to possession basis for 4 quarters. Nobody is doing that. And that's why you're 500. I mean, it just, take a step back and I hate to steal a line from our guy A-Rod, right? But RELAX, everybody. Relax. It's going to shake itself out. It's either going to work or it's not. But to sit here and feel like you have to come up with these big inventive theories just is a waste of everybody's time.
yeah, I mean, I say this almost every time, watching it. It's like you're saying, we've been fans of this team for 5 or 6 years now, and it's just like it's hard to disengage yourself from what's going on and how games turn out because you're such a big fan of this organization or this team or these players. But sometimes you do have to step back and say, hey, this is what's going on right now. All these guys know what's happening. They know that they're coming out flat in these second halves and not playing up to their standard. So just let it play out. Relax. And then, like we're saying, if it's 25, 30 games into this and it's still happening, then we have an issue. Then you can start to make those moves or changes as need be. But just enjoy it. There's going to be ups and downs throughout the whole season. You've seen it already with injuries. And so that gets everybody down in the dumps. And now, since we started 4-1 and we're looking good, and now we're on a 2-game losing streak, now the sky is falling. Just take it game by game, see the subtle improvements, and go from there.
Yeah, well said. Well, I think with that we can go ahead and wrap this one up. Going to be going ahead and looking forward to that next game. I know where we got a tough Minnesota team that's a good defensive group that's going to certainly test them and um, test their commitment to it and how focused and professional they can be on the offensive end. But again, let's go ahead and take a step back. Everybody let it breathe. Like you said, everything will shake itself out one way or another. But we have responsibilities as fans, and especially ourselves and other individuals that are taking it upon themselves to cover this team. That you have an oath and a duty to do it the right way and to report the right stuff. So hopefully moving forward, we can objectively look at this and you know review it and discuss it in greater detail as we can. But at the end of the day, that's all we can do, and we got to do it the right way.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. And like you said, we got another opportunity against the Timberwolves at their place, another road game. So, you know, let's try to get this next one, and hopefully we see those improvements by the guys that we kind of discussed tonight, and see where the chips fall, and continue this season.